make a start because it is 5 past. Okay, Phil's recording. I'll make a start, and then whoever joins us can join us and pick it up as we go through. Well, welcome everybody. As my name plaque suggests, I'm Imelda Havers, and I'm the project coordinator enabler for York Central Co-owned, or YoCo as we call it. And I'm just introducing the session today alongside my colleagues Phil Bixby, Helen Graham, James Newton, and Sue Bird. This is a bit of this is a YoCo focused session, but it's a three-way partnership really with YoCo, Yorspace, which we'll come on to later, the community-led housing developer provider in York, which James and I and Sue are also involved in, and My York Central, which is Helen and Phil. So that's the sort of triumvirate that's leading on the YoCo session this afternoon. So we are expecting about possibly up to 30 here. So it's going to be quite a sort of rapid turnover in terms of getting as many people engaged and involved as possible. What we want to do today is to come out with a bit of a steer from the people here on how they would envisage a co-owned neighbourhood, particularly in a post-COVID world. At the end of it, we will, we're very, very keen for everyone to stay engaged and involved, because this is the early start to what could be a really exciting and long-running project on York Central. Phil will go through the background in a minute. I would just like to point out that this is going to be filmed, this session. And so anybody who's got under 18s, could they just be aware of that and maybe want their children not to be filmed? That's what we would recommend. If possible, can everybody turn their mics off when they're not speaking? But in the interest of us being able to see each other, could you turn your videos on? And I'm just hoping the bandwidth will take it. So if you could all sort of switch your videos on and your mics off, then we'll be able to see each other. That is about it. We will be, any thoughts and questions as you go through, please use the chat option and fill in chat function. And I think we ought to just sort of, and I'd also briefly just like to point you to our website, we'll come back to it later, which is yoco.uk, yoco.uk. So you can join us by going to that and signing up onto our mailing list. So yeah, hi everybody, welcome everybody. And I don't know if anyone has come prepared with this, but we'd really like to know where your neighbourhood is. And so if you're from York, if you're from outside of York, not your exact address or anything like that, if you've got a sheet of paper with a nice felt tip pen, you can just write it on and hold it up to the screen. That'd be great. If not, I'm just trying to, we have a chat function. So if you want to just say, hi, I'm so-and-so from wherever, if you prefer to put it in the chat function, that's absolutely fine. So if I go after 3, if everybody turn their videos on, is that possible? Because not everyone has managed to do that. Okay, there's some people who don't want to turn their videos on, which I absolutely fine. Can you, if you've got a piece of paper, hold it up now. If not, put something in the chat box.
Hey.
Okay, and just I will do a screen share of this when everyone's done it. If you can just hold them there for a minute. This is a bit of an experiment. Brilliant. Okay, I think we're there. Right. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I got that. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I don't know why mine's backward. I didn't write it that way.
21st century technology. Wow.
Okay, so that's that bit done. I'm now going to hand over to Phil Bixby, who's going to take us through the background of YoCo in the context of York Central and the wider city and COVID-19. So over to you, Phil.
Okay, I'm going to hopefully share a document with you which you can hopefully see. Good. I'm going to give you a quick bit of background about York Central and how YoCo came about. Helen and I worked on a project 2 years ago now called My York Central, which was a public engagement program looking at York Central and how people saw the place and how they wanted it to develop. We started very much from scratch, asking people fundamental questions about living there, working there, open space there, movement there. And from that, we drew up a public vision for the site and a summary set of 8 big ideas, which is what you can hopefully see on your screen in front of you now. The big ideas were again, kind of, fairly fundamental stuff about things like homes for living, not investment, exploiting the benefits of high density, and about it being a part of the city which was about people, not cars. But there were a couple in particular of kind of issues that came up within that, which we felt were really interesting and really quite key ones. One of those was about the idea of a community made through exchange. The notion of a part of the city which was so rich in what went on there that people would want to be there, not because of it looking good or kind of being clean or whatever, but because of the mixture of stuff that went on there and the opportunities to engage with it. And we also, the number 7 on the list was about the idea of a hub that catalyses York's creativity and innovation, making York Central a place that very much kind of focused on creativity and innovation and found ways to kind of connect people to enable that to really flourish there. So the way Helen and I always work is a kind of is a process which starts off by asking very kind of fundamental ideas. And I've just done a little kind of flow here showing how that works. So it starts off by kind of running events that get people out there talking about places, that gets conversations going, and we then use post-its to record information. And on both the Castle Gateway project, which is illustrated here, and also on My York Central, we end up with about 4,000 odd post-it notes as a result of the public engagement process. Each one of those was then screenshotted, photographed, whatever, scanned, uploaded to Flickr, and then tagged. And by tagging them, we were able to turn it, if you like, into a kind of database of information based around all of the issues which have been raised during the public engagement process. We then started to address those issues and look for where there were challenges and conflicts and ran public events around them to try and see how we could work with the tricky stuff and not simply be put off by the complexities of something that was multidimensional. The next step on from that was then producing the vision document, which was a lengthy piece of work. But in addition to trying to phrase things as well we could within that as a kind of in terms of what the policy would be about the site, we've linked it all back, all of the underlined bits are hyperlinked back to searches of those post-it notes. So that there's a very, very direct trail from what we said within the vision document and the big ideas and what people had said during the sessions that we ran on the post-its that we collected. And then the last image there is the kind of last step in the process that we take, which is about making change together. So this was taken at an earlier meeting with YoCo, where some of those ideas, particularly around a place made through exchange, a place that catalyses York's creativity and innovation. This was a kind of initial meeting to start thinking about how might we do that. The third image I've got here is then to kind of just really kind of think a little bit more about this process of how we started to think about shaping a neighbourhood. And really we started thinking about 3 kind of different aspects of it. The first is about the straightforward physical. So it's about how do you create spaces which work for that kind of thing. What kind of buildings, what kind of streets, what kind of open public spaces do we need to enable the community to do the kind of multi-dimensional living, working, playing, learning, whatever kind of mix of activities that we wanted. We also realised that we needed to think about reshaping the economics. So we looked during the work that we did very much at what Yorspace has been doing in looking at community share issues to raise money to help fund the type of affordable housing they wanted to do. And we looked at what Headingley Development Trust have been doing over in Leeds to see how they had used community share issue there to bring money in to enable the community to ensure it had the things it wanted, so that it gave them funding to do things like ensure that shop units remained as useful local shops for people that live there, rather than as takeaways for the student population in wider Leeds. So we recognised there needed to be investment and ownership of common benefit. There needed to be some kind of redistributive kind of economy on the site. And then the last one is about fostering networks. So it's about how we design a neighbourhood to facilitate the exchanging of skills, time and money to bring the neighbourhood to life, so that anybody who wants to engage with their neighbourhood and has the capacity to do so, whether that's through skills they've got, or time they have, or expertise or experience they have, or whatever, has an opportunity to do so. So those kind of struck us as being the kind of key building blocks really for this idea of a kind of a well thought through community-led neighbourhood. And that's very much where we are at the moment in terms of thinking about YoCo as being a project moving forward. So I will, at that point, stop sharing that. Did that all make sense? And is there anything on the chat box I need to have a look at to see whether there's any questions about it?
Nothing on the chat box. Sorry.
What we're going to be doing throughout the session, as Imelda and Phil have set out, is really starting to collectively build a bit of a vision and a brief for what YoCo might be. We'll be working with those three ideas of creating spaces, reshaping economics and fostering networks. But we're going to get there by the end of the session by first thinking a little bit about our lives pre-COVID and post-COVID, and using that to generate a bit of an understanding of what those connections are that make a life that we want to live, and ultimately a neighbourhood we might want to live in. So that's the bit that we're going to do now. So what we're going to invite you all to do in a moment or two, and I'm just going to share my screen now, is to think about a journey that you did regularly before COVID and that you enjoyed. We're going to ask you to think about where you went and how you got there, what you did and who you might have met, what connections you might have made, whether that's around shopping or people that you know, and also what the journey felt like. And we're going to do that to really start to understand some of the really complex connections that make up a really good life, and ultimately help us think about what makes a good neighbourhood. So to get your creative juices flowing about this, Phil's going to give an example of a journey that he used to enjoy before COVID, and then we'll hand over to you to start to do some of that thinking yourself. So over to you, Phil.
Yeah, this is very much a pre-COVID journey before they shut all the shops. So yeah, my regular journey would be a walk into town from where I live. I tend to walk in rather than get other means of transport in. It's a good opportunity to think, and it's just the same length of time as the average podcast lasts. So it's a good kind of opportunity to kind of walk and take on board stuff. The route I've got into town is fairly green, so that's a pleasant walk. When I get into the middle of the town, the shopping there is really varied. So I can use the big shops, but there are also independent bakers there and all sorts of stuff like that. And then there's a market too, so I can buy food there, or if it's anywhere near lunchtime and I fancy street food, then there's the opportunity to stop and eat there. York City Centre is a great place to meet people because York's small enough that you generally kind of know people. So if I meet people, there are good coffee places to go while in town. While I'm in town, because I'm self-employed and I'm fairly flexible, I can maybe double it up with doing meetings. So City Screen Cafe or Micklegate Social are kind of great places to hold meetings with people. If I take the laptop with me, they've all got Wi-Fi, so I can double up, walk into town, do my shopping, get a bit of fresh air, but also work if I need to. There are loads of places to stop and relax on the way, so the gallery, the riverside, museum gardens, stuff like that. So because my immediate neighbourhood, I live off Little Hog Moor, isn't particularly mixed, I need that kind of bigger space, that bigger chunk of city to be able to get that kind of mixture of stuff. But as long as I'm prepared to do a bit of walking, and it's all out there. That's my walk and the kind of things that I do in places I go along the way.
So now it's really over to you to have a think on your own or with whoever you're doing this workshop with about a journey pre-COVID that you enjoyed in the way that Phil's done, whatever it is. Make some notes. What we're going to do in a couple of minutes' time is just invite a couple of volunteers to share their journey. So have a think about whether you'd like to be one of those volunteers. And we'll use that to start to draw out what are the things that make a really good neighbourhood. So 2 minutes to think about your journey, and then we'll come back together to hear a couple of people's examples. Final 15 seconds to put your finishing touches to your journey. Okay, so it'd be great if there were a couple of people who were prepared to share their journey. So have a think if you'd like to volunteer. What we're going to do is, while we hear about people's journey, we're going to really invite everybody else to listen really hard and start to draw out what the different questions are posed for them from that person's journey in a way that will help us ultimately think about this brief for YoCo. So, for example, with Phil's journey, there might be some questions there about why you walked, what was good about the market, what made it somewhere that you wanted to go. What happens when it rains? Do you always walk into town? You know, what are there certain places on the way that are particularly important to you, or you like to stop off at, or to see along the way? Are there things that would make that journey better, more enjoyable, more pleasant? You know, what makes those places that you talked about for meeting, like City Screen or Museum Gardens, places that you actively wanted to spend time? So they might be some of the questions that are posed by Phil's journey. But over to you. Any volunteers who are prepared to share their journey? Someone's being volunteered. Looks like Karen's volunteering James. Am I wrong?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Excellent. Yeah, I think I've just been volunteered. So we are in Holgate, and certainly pre-COVID, on a weekend, typically on a Saturday, we would enjoy a drive out to towards Haxby. There's the Curious Coffee a place out at Haxby, and we've gone to there quite a few times. Got to sort of know the the people who work there, and occasionally when we've been borrowing a friend's dog, the dog's gone with us to enjoy some free chicken and cheese as appropriate. But also while we're out there, we've gone to the Moorlands Wildlife Park, which is not too far from Haxby. Very, very pleasant little wooded area. And oh yes, yeah, and I'm very close to the garden centre, Brown's Garden Centre. Again, just a kind of a short drive from Haxby to Moorlands, and Moorlands to the garden centre, and then typically or frequently finishing by driving back towards York or to the outskirts of York, to Clifton, into Wilkinson's, pick up some pick a mix, over to the cinema at View, catch a film, and then ultimately head back to Holgate. So I suppose, you know, that's under a normal Saturday. There's the usual traffic snarl ups around the northern ring road at usual places. Certainly considerably less now at the moment, if we venture out. But they're not open, of course, so everything's shut down. So we haven't been able to do that for a while. But yeah, that's kind of, you know. Yeah. Is that pleasure? Thank you.
Thank you. So Phil's been doing a bit of a spider diagram of your journey as you've been speaking that we will reveal in a moment. Any questions raised by Karen and James's story? Anything you want to ask about? Phil?
Yeah, I've got one, which is you talked about knowing the staff at the Curious Coffee Place. Is that a real kind of big attraction in terms of making it a more personal journey, one that you want to do?
Yeah, and same with going to Bishopthorpe Road as well. Of course, the shops there, and then particularly Trinecria with Beppe. Everybody knows Beppe. Yeah. And it's part of the deal. It's like he remembers everybody, and that's why you go back.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, obviously the food's good as well, but it's that connection. The connection makes it.
Yeah. To go in and be recognised as a sort of a semi-regular, rather than just being, you know, take a seat, we'll come and serve you, and all the rest of it. There's the sort of the occasional or random conversations when the people working there, they've got 3 minutes of downtime, for example. They'll come over, they'll chat, and, you know, how we doing, what's going on, and have you seen this, and have you seen, and it's just pleasant. It's
that's what people want. Nice. That's actually what people want.
Yes.
Good food as well. But they want the conversation.
Yeah, very much.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else got any questions or anything they noticed or seems really important about the story that we want to kind of hold on to as we move towards building the brief for YoCo?
I've just got a comment just on that. That connection with the people that run places that you visit. Like I noticed when I was drawing out mine that, you know, going to the cafe or going to the greengrocers, but I go and I'm not in there. I'm not in a rush. Like I'm chatting to people. And again, that feeling that that they were just saying there with regards to having that connection to someone, I think that's quite an important thing, and especially the types of businesses that you go to support, because you know that they're investing in the local economy. I think that's a big win for me personally.
Yeah, very much so.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Rebecca, are you about to say something?
I think I was going to say something really not that interesting, but I really like that you had pick a mix from a separate place where you went to the
yeah, don't tell Vu that is going on where we're sneaking it in. So that's between us. So.
I think you're allowed to do that. Common misconception.
There's a sense of truth in, you know, perhaps Yorkshire people and adopted Yorkshire people being, you know, careful with their money and not necessarily needing to spend the exorbitant prices at the local cinema for pick and mix when you can just quite happily get something at a far. Yeah, well, no, absolutely not getting ripped off. But yeah, no, it's the opportunity is there, so you know, just.
But
just
then you've
record.
also, yeah, you've also saved a bit of money there and maybe spent a bit more in the cafe earlier. So you're
win-win.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, we're distributing our money in a very sort of egalitarian way, hopefully.
It's just the kind of redistributive economy we'll be talking about in due course, isn't it?
Okay, I love it.
Hand up, Kat.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep. So I was thinking about the fact that you have this little routine that's part of your Saturday, and that it's almost like a mini tour of the city. You've got your little landmarks, and I wondered how often, and you do this in the car. I wondered how often you would swap that for a day trip in the car outside of York. And how often that routine is something that you stick to on a Saturday.
Depends what else we're doing, I think. If we've been in the past, we've travelled quite a lot, and then we also another one is going to Swinster Reservoir near Harrogate, then going to Balthazar's Cafe in Harrogate. So again, it's a similar routine, isn't it? You go somewhere, you go to a place that's nice and independent, then you go for a walk, and you sort of do that trip back. So it's like a longer version.
Yeah. So the purpose isn't to go to explicitly just point A. It's we'll go to point A and then go on to point B and then possibly go on to point C and then come back again. So and you know, if it's a special occasion, birthdays or whatever, that it could be, well, let's go somewhere we've not been before, or somewhere sort of slightly further afield, or whatever. But we're not sort of prescriptively tied to this is what we do on a Saturday at this particular time or anything like that. It's very much weather dependent, mood dependent, time and opportunity dependent. It's a variable factor, I think.
Yes, Helen's just put a note, which was exactly what I was thinking about around routines and the regularity of something. And I wondered how often that's something that we do, maybe without realising it, that we just have these patterns of behaviour that are kind of comforting or that are social.
I was just going to add in as well, how often do you go into town rather than out?
Well, for yourself in pre-COVID working times, you'd be walking into town for work. I'd be working from home, but then and again maybe during the more pleasant times of the year, spring, summer, going into town to previously when things like the comedy festival was on a couple of years ago, we'd go into the city centre, that sort of idea. I think it's fair to, and this might be one of these opportunities for a negative, which is when the inevitable horse racing meets are on a weekend, and when there's perhaps a peak in weekend stag and hen parties, we just don't go into the city centre. It's just not worth it. It's genuinely unpleasant, and I think a lot of other York residents have come to that same independent conclusion, that it's just not worth going into the city centre on those particular occasions, which is very unfortunate.
Thank you, Sarah.
Can I just add a comment to that? Actually, it's very similar in our town. I would go into town on a Friday night, for example, to go to our local independent pubs. But most people I know, most of my friends, refuse to go into Harrogate the weekend on Saturday, again because of stag and hen weekends going on. It's just messy and just really not worth going in to a town on a Saturday.
And that really raises a question about the relationship between city centre and neighbourhoods, which is really core to thinking about YoCo. So we'll maybe come back to that question a little bit later on when we get back to drawing out the implication of these stories for the brief. But thank you so much, Karen and James, for sharing that, and for everyone else for their questions. Phil is, as we speak, sorting out his spider diagrams. But while he does that, I'd like to invite another volunteer to share their journey so that we can explore what makes it so wonderful, what makes it work. So if you'd like to go next.
Come on, people.
Sarah.
It's a bit like a day in the life of a mum, basically, who's self-employed. So basically, I walk to school. My daughter's at a school just in the middle of town, not far from the town centre on Colbath Road, Weston. So we usually walk there. Then afterwards, I always pop into an independent bakery called Manor Bakery and always grab my breakfast there because I can't be bothered to make it myself in the morning. I'm too busy. And buy some bread. Then I usually walk over to the Everyman. Generally have meetings, try to do them first thing in the morning to get them out of the way. So I've got the rest of the day to do things for work. And then I walk back through town. I might pop into a couple of independents who are friends, people that I know, have a chat. Might sit and have a coffee with them or do some work if it's a cafe. And then I walk up to my mum's, who's in the west side of Harrogate, and I walk through Valley Gardens and the Pine Woods, and I have lunch with her. Then back to Weston to pick up Ella, and then back to the bakery or Finley's for an ice cream. So that's kind of my day, really. And then work starts when she's gone to bed.
Thanks so much, Sarah. So anything anyone notices or any questions they've got for Sarah about that day and that journey? Sounds delicious, though.
Question, I guess. Then you're doing all of that on foot, so that's a fair old walk. Is there a kind of amount of time in a day that you're happy to be foot slogging around, or are you pretty much?
Yeah, I mean, I like to do the walk up to my mum's because it's like similar to what you said, Phil. It gives me time to think, and I do a lot of podcasts on that walk through the woods, and because I'm walking through a green area, a green connection, it's kind of energizing. I find it quite energizing. So that's basically why I kind of do that routine, even if it's raining, and it also gets some exercise in as well. And the traffic in Harrogate is horrendous.
Julia's got a question or a thought.
Oh, just to say, I was really interested in Sarah's sort of rundown of that, and I'm doing some work on something else called Recipe for Life, this thing about food and food chains, and it struck me that a lot of these rituals, if we really dig down in all of it was just a question really, if we dig into all of the walks that we've put together, well, what point did people reflect about food, even if they didn't do something about it? Because I think that's one of the interesting things about York. It's got all these independent food shops that even if you didn't mean to go somewhere, you might go past somewhere and go, oh, I must go into that. And that in a way, I think what we haven't got now is that connection and a day-to-day trigger thing around what I might call sort of almost like food lines. And that really interests me as if we were to be able to, I mean, we could even do it after this as well, as if we really sort of tried to think back to the exact food lines that we took in before this new world order. But for me, there's a question of how we do that now, because for me, I've got my stopping place in Bishopthorpe, and I have a lot to do with Brunswick Organic Nursery, which is completely wonderful. So yeah, it just really interests me, Sarah's obvious joy in those little. It wasn't just about the food; it was about It was about the connections and the emotional dynamic. So that has interested me a lot.
I love the idea of food lines. Speaking of somebody,
yeah.
I also with Sarah, yeah, we
could maybe think about redrawing them as well, and in almost like mapping them. I think that could be I'm really looking all the time now in all the work I'm doing, that everything to me has become at street and doorstep level. Everything. It's become like further and further and further into physically where you are. As we get wider and wider and wider in this, I think it's actually amazing.
You talked also, Sarah, about using Everyman as effectively your place where you do meetings. Is that
Unashamedly, I know I've met you there, Phil.
Yeah, you have. I feel I thought it was just me, but no, it's obviously everybody. But I mean, it's kind of that that use of semi-public space, isn't it? Which kind of becomes you can do what you will with it, really.
Yeah. I mean, it's just a really nice open space, and there's little corners. I mean, we even have our board meetings in there for the CLT. So yeah, I really like it. And when we're there, we actually do notice that there's other people. Like we've noticed people playing chess in there, which is really good actually. So it is really good public space.
Brilliant.
Presumably that's not open at the moment though, Sarah. So well, are you taking your daughter to school? Or is
No,
totally
she's doing Zoom at the moment. A bit like myself, it's a Zoom all the way.
Yeah. Okay. So.
But
yeah,
however,
totally
we are doing the food connection still. So our kind of my daily ritual or weekly ritual actually, because I tend to only go out on a weekly basis now, is I always go to Manor Bakery first to get the jam donuts before they sell out. But then I have to drive all the way over to Green Hamilton to go to the butcher. Then I drive all the way to Minskip to buy eggs and strawberries. And then I go to Ripon to buy the rest of everything, then come back to Harrogate, because I find the stores in Harrogate, I went once and it was just too frightening. And I'm shielding 2 people. So that's why I have this crazy weekly ritual now of doing this really long drive, it seems.
There are decent butchers in Harrogate. There are some available. You
can't beat Tancred.
All right.
Okay.
Anyway.
So what Phil's been working on while we've been speaking is drawing out some diagrams of the journeys that people spoke through, but also enriched by the questions everybody else was asking about that and the conversation we've had around those journeys. So Phil's going to, in a moment or two, so I will carry on talking while he does the scanning, scan in both of those journey maps so that we can have a look at them. And what we're doing throughout the workshop is building towards having a brief for YoCo. So that's what we're working towards. So we're trying to build it up slowly through different people's stories, the conversations that we can have, so that we can start to draw out the kind of the networks, the spaces, and the economics we're going to need to make this work. So I can see Phil's still scanning, so I'm going to carry on talking until he's finished. He's done it! So he's now going to share the 2 maps so we can have a look at them and make some final comments about anything else that we noticed or anything else we want to add. And then we're going to have a look, just to jump so you can sort of see where we're going next. We're going to have a look at like post-COVID, what's happened for all of us since lockdown, and what's changed and what we've learned, I guess, a little bit from these experiences we've been having over the past weeks. So Phil's about to screen share. He's also muted, but he might know that.
Right, are we there?
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay, so this was the first one. Just kind of looking at these kind of at the connections, because one of the things that would be nice to do as we go through this session is start to think about, as I talked about in that kind of early kind of session about shaping, what is it that shapes the place, and it's the connections which seem to be the key thing. So here's just that kind of one from the first of those 2 stories. Just great in terms of this kind of these links between home, between businesses, the issues around the fact that the businesses run by people who you know, and that therefore not only do you get the kind of personal stuff like conversation, but the dog gets looked after, which is great. And the fact that you're mixing in that kind of thing, all sorts of experiences from wildlife and green through to buying stuff, through to films, through to the lovely detail about kind of stocking up with the pick and mix beforehand in order to play the system there, which is great. So there's a kind of real mixture there of stuff, and this the kind of thing at the top about journeys are often not just going to a place and coming back, but tend to be kind of things that take in a number of different destinations. And I just was prompted while you were talking about that, about this thing about habits. You know, I've read a fascinating book about habits recently. Habits are fascinating, fabulous things, and we all rely on them. The trick is choosing your habits, and once you've chosen them, then they can be very good. Here's the second one, which was Sarah's, which is about going from home to school, and then again this kind of fabulous odyssey, which takes in buying food, but also having breakfast there. So the fact that food-related places serve these two functions about, you know, just giving you meals, but also giving you stuff to take away. The use of the cinema for all this stuff, which it was, well, I was going to say it was never designed for, but probably was really, in terms of getting people through over the threshold and making use of the place. And the value of cafe space where you can meet, whether it's simply big enough in an impersonal way like that you can do stuff there without anybody really worrying too much, or whether it's consciously kind of set up so it encourages people to do things there. And then again, you know, the kind of mixture of shops with friends, the gardens, your mum's place, but the reasons for walking, and podcasts, the greenery, stuff like that. They're all just kind of, they're all connections. And I loved Julia's comment about the kind of food lines, these kind of connections, almost like literal kind of breadcrumb trails through the city, which are about what gets us from one mealtime or one piece of food or one treat or whatever to another. So those are the two of them, and I'll save them and circulate them afterwards. So there we go.
That's brilliant. So has anyone got any final thoughts about these two journeys? Anything you noticed when you've seen them in diagrammed form that is good for us to log at this point? Okay, so let's focus now on post-COVID. So we've all been experiencing lockdown to various degrees over the last 12 weeks or however long it's been. So what we wanted to explore now, and I'll just share my screen again, is about the post-COVID journeys that you've done, if you've done them at all, and open to the fact that some people, it might be very much from inside their homes as well, what connections have happened to you where you are. But again, thinking about something that feels positive about this time or seems to define this moment that we're in now, thinking about where you went and how you got there, think about some of those connections that we've been exploring, how the journey felt and how it was different to the way it was before lockdown. So again, just take a couple of minutes to jot down some notes, think about something that you've done during this time, and then again we'll ask for a couple of people to share those journeys, and we'll do the same process for the post-COVID journeys as well. So over to you for 2 minutes reflection.
Phil and Helen, there's a question from Julia. in the chat box, can I share photos onto screen from my journey without hosting?
Yeah, Phil can give you access, Julia.
And Julia also had a question over the diagram. Can we use Google Maps, which has histories of all our journeys? Not too sure what that means. We could map real life then and real life now.
I guess, Julia, maybe in general in the future as part of this kind of wider development of ideas for YoCo, maybe rather than today. Is that that's how I interpreted that, which is a great idea.
Yes, that's yeah.
Right, so that's the 2 minutes. So I will take the slide down so we can see each other and really go through the same process, but hopefully with some different people volunteering to share their journey on this occasion. So again, we're looking for a couple of people who are just prepared to talk through their post-COVID lockdown experiences in a way that we can start to draw out some of those connections. Julia, were you sort of saying you'd like to do that and share some photos?
Chris is putting his hand up, I think, as well.
Oh, sorry, Chris, I didn't see that. Chris, do you want to go first? Then I'll see.
Julia first.
Julia, should we go with Chris first and then do you want to go next? Yeah, brilliant. Chris, thank you so much. Do share lockdown experiences.
Yeah, this is actually a lot of what Sarah's route was earlier, but I've lived in Harrogate for about 23 years, and I've had this leaflet, which I'll just do here. There you go. Town Trails with the blue plaques, and it actually splits into four different areas, which are colour coded all around the centre of Harrogate. And we've probably had this leaflet in the house for about 5 years, something like that, and it's just been lying around. And now comes COVID, and my wife and I said the other day, oh, let's do that. Let's actually go around and look at all these places on the trail here. And it was lovely. It was took about 3-4 hours to do the whole of the thing. Most of it in areas we've obviously been in lots of times before. We've seen several of these plaques. We've maybe read the odd one or two, but we haven't done it in any kind of formatted trail. And there was a lot of learning experience. Food also came into it because we took a sandwich and sat in the aforementioned Valley Gardens. Made a point of sitting there with the little notices saying you couldn't sit there. That I don't know whether you saw that earlier, Sarah, but the council had a thing about not sitting in the Valley Gardens because it encourages people to stop and talk to you. And we did. We talked to people, and they talked to us, which was great because we were out in the open. But it was really good. And as I said, the thing was, we could have done this at any time, but we all live so busy lives, don't we? And we all think, oh, you know, we won't have time for that. And it did help discover the town and some of the history and just some of the little byways and alleyways you've perhaps not even travelled down before. So it was a great experience, and we both said afterwards we'll probably do it again someday, even post COVID, because it'll be a totally different experience, of course. Now people are allowed to stop and talk to each other as well.
Thanks so much, Chris. Anyone got any reflections or thoughts or questions on Chris's journey that will help us think about those connections and those motivations?
Hi, just something quickly from me. Sorry, if I put my camera on, it's unlikely that I'll stay connected to you for long, so I'll just put my microphone on.
Chat box. Thanks, Heather. Yeah,
Great. So I just kind of wanted to build on what Chris had said. So my pre-COVID journey that I would have given as an example would have been going to Bishopsthorpe Road and going to the shops there, as was already kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. And interestingly, that's probably the journey that I'm doing the most during this period as well. We live just outside of the city walls, so it's a nice, easy journey for us to do. We're only going out when we have to, so we're only going out to get food and when we feel like we're going to go mad if we stay inside any longer. And yeah, I think having this sort of limitation, we've spoken a lot about how it makes you really appreciate the simplicity of what we actually need to sustain ourselves. So just having a bit of fresh air, going to get fresh food that we like and that we need. And I work at the university, so we've been sort of diverting our route a little bit to go near the university as well, and it brings a bit of familiarity for me to a sense of being in some way at home as well and really comfortable doing these walks. And so yeah, I think that's something that after this is all over, I think we'll have learned a lot from that experience of just appreciating those everyday things that we do and the things that we have directly around us.
Thanks so much, Heather. Yeah. Anyone else got any thoughts or reflections, either about Chris's journey or what Heather's just shared as well, about some of those new routines that have kind of sprung up in the context of lockdown? Imelda?
Yeah, I think I very much agree with what's coming through in both of these examples is actually the time to really get to go deeper into where you live and those little places and pockets of spaces where you live. And I've definitely found that personally, that, you know, when you're busy and when there's a lot going on, you're skating the surface of a lot. And then, but with this time, you're getting, it's kind of distilling things down to a much more simple level, and you're able to appreciate, like the walk, the guided trail around Harrogate, or, you know, the walk to Bishy Road, or something, or anything like that. And you know, you do value those things. So I think that's something that you can't unknow. Once you've known that, you have it with you forever, potentially, which is actually quite an interesting legacy that I don't think many people would have foreseen about COVID. So that's just an observation.
I've got a comment really on what Heather said, which was an interesting point in there about the kind of the nature of comfort, of being somewhere which makes you feel good simply because you feel you fit in there, or that you know the place, or that it in some way, you know, kind of it talks to you about the kind of your ability to make choices to go for things that you want, that are important to you, and somehow then kind of reflects back that ability. That, I think, might be something where, you know, given the general bad vibes going around, that might be something that, you know, we take with us quite some way into the future as a kind of as a positive thing that we want in our cities or want in our neighbourhoods. So that's would be interesting to see how that might be, kind of how you might think about building that into kind of a place if you were trying to create a new neighbourhood.
Just a point that Kat, you've made in the chat box, just about, in a way, we've redistributed some of those journeys and some of that work of moving around to other people during lockdown. So the crucial role that's being played by people who are delivering our food or delivering our essentials. So I think, I mean, that's a really important point to notice, isn't it? That some of that work, if you like, of moving around and getting what we need has been, other people have been taking that on as part of the public health measures.
Yeah, I was thinking about a podcast I listened to before this happened about the way that Amazon deliveries are changing the kind of landscape of our cities, as all of the vans, like online deliveries, are becoming more and more widespread, and the van, like an increasing number of vans are trying to navigate particularly smaller cities and having a knock-on effect for traffic and pedestrians. So I'm wondering if we shift even further in that direction because of lockdown and because of COVID going forward, whether that will just presumably accelerate some of those issues of how our cities and towns are being navigated commercially as well as by citizens?
That's a kind of key issue that came up a lot during the MyYork Central discussions. Actually, is how to manage deliveries in a way that doesn't mean that every street is snarled up with delivery vans. So maybe we can log that on the map that Phil's drawing, so that we can come back to it when we're drawing out the brief. He's already done it. So thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris, for sharing that, and everyone who's asked questions or shared their own stories as part of that. Julia, did you want to go next in sharing your post-COVID?
Yeah, I'm wondering whether I can do it rather than have a fact, whether you can see this on my phone. I mean, I don't know whether this works. Just a minute on. Can you see?
Yeah. Yes.
Does that work for people?
No, I can't see it.
Yep, got
All
it.
right, okay.
Kind of.
I'll just talk through it. Let's not faff. Because we can do this maybe at another time. Basically, I've been landed because my plan was to go to Berlin for a while, and I'm not. I'm in Bishopthorpe doing my thing in a rented bungalow. So all my routines, having been an urbanite, have completely, utterly changed, which is interesting in itself. So I'm fine with living the day. What I've noticed is that, you know, this thing that we talk about time, I feel that it's like an elastic band, so that a lot of the time, when I'm walking particularly, it's as if somebody has put something into slow motion. And I would be really interested to know whether this is a collective experience, that what Imelda was beginning to talk about, that the noticing, it feels like, not to say that you're on some sort of drug, but that's how it feels to me, that everything is like, whoa, that wasn't there before, you know, like a twig, the sensitivity, I think, has been increased. And for me, and for anybody that has me on Facebook, it's become a bit of a cult, I'm afraid, because my kids that live actually now 5 minutes away from me said, you do know that you're trespassing in that field, in that barley field, don't you? And I go, well, nobody's stopped me as yet. So I've been walking into this barley field every day, which is around the corner, taking photographs. And I have to say, I've become quite obsessed, because as well that we have the celebration of Shavuot, which is it Pentecost in the Christian calendar? And of course, it's all about Ruth and sheaves of barley. And of course, all these things that were, you know, nice stories. Oh, yes, I can. Sort of, I'm fiddling with bits of barley, thinking, oh, now, so for me, this whole thing about where food comes from and how we're experiencing everything on a day-to-day, my journey, I have to go to this field around the corner every day, whatever else I do or don't do. And I'm wondering where it's become a massive, massive ritual. And I really like what I'm hearing from people here is that the rituals of life that are hanging us all together in what I'm choosing to call the different now time, because I can't stand the new normal thing, because it's just ridiculous to me, is in the different now time. Are we in a position now, a really quite challenging and exciting one, to create these new firm rituals for ourselves that are more deeply caring of what we're doing? And it strikes me that we are, from listening to people. And my journey is just to this barley field where I'm obviously trespassing. Nobody has stopped me. And I've watched the barley grow from 2 inches to now above my waist. And that's what I do with my spare time. So that, and it feels that it's giving me a lesson in how to look at life.
Thank you so much, Julia. Anyone got anything that they notice about that or resonates with anyone else? Susanna? Sue. Sorry, just because I read your name.
It's okay. It's not really a question, it's just that resonates very strongly with me. At the beginning of lockdown, I came to Leeds, to where my partner lives, and although I visited, you know, many times, I'd never really lived here until lockdown, and all of a sudden I was in this sort of strange place during this strange time, and I started to look for local places to go for a run, because I'd never even sort of been for a jog around the local streets, and I found that he lives very close by to the White Rose Centre, but behind there's all these fields and all these sort of paths that I started walking along and running along. And as I arrived, the farmers obviously decided to plough up some of these fields and plant them with new crops, and kind of watching them come through, and just sort of feeling that grounding and that connection was a real comfort to me, because I think coming to a new place in such a strange time was quite disorientating, and I think it added to my anxiety, and finding sort of something very grounding like that and very sort of comforting, and that kind of ritual, and seeing the crops, seeing the sort of the bare soil come up and then the crops come through, was sort of, I understand that kind of the comfort of seeing that kind of natural cycle in the midst of all this sort of strange new time we're in.
Rebecca. Well, Rebecca, then Jennifer.
Mine's just to add to what Sue just said, because we came to settle where Johnny's got a house rather than staying in York with my brother and his girlfriend in our little cottage, which was going to be unbearable. But again, like that sort of, you move somewhere, I've got no friends here, I can't go and look at them in the garden or anything, but there's so many sheep and hills, and it's really, it is really nice to have that earthly grounding, and being able to go for a walk in the countryside and, you know, do the 3 peaks because they're just there. These sort of things that I don't usually have in my day-to-day life. I'm usually just cycling to a meeting and then back to home to get Arthur from school or whatever. So yeah, I totally get where you're coming from with the displacement, but also a grounding thing.
Jennifer.
Hi everybody, I'm going to buck the trend a little bit here. I'm actually going to start by saying Sue Bird is drinking out of a hedgehog mug today that I love. I'm really enjoying seeing that. Thanks, Sue. And to get back on topic, I'm feeling a little bit different to how everyone else is expressing themselves today. I'm hearing you talk about familiar places and unfamiliar places and how you're seeing them with new eyes or experiencing something a bit like wonderment. I'm feeling since lockdown less connected to the outside than I think I've ever felt before. I'm feeling a sense of, going back to the ideas like we've been talking about, belonging, for example, and I'm feeling like the outside doesn't belong to me. I'm feeling it's somewhat demonized, perhaps. And you can have your ideas about that. Is it a media narrative? Is it a government thing? Stay home and all that sort of stuff. I'm feeling a bit like, when I do go out, which isn't often, my life is very much in a digital space now. I'm feeling both hurried and harried. So I'm not getting this sense of elastic time that Julie was talking about. I'm not getting a sense of noticing stuff that I haven't noticed before. I'm feeling like, get it done and get home. So I'm not feeling like the outside spaces in my community belong to me in the same way that perhaps they did before. It's a bit of a downer, but I felt like that is a little bit, I'm hearing lots of people saying the opposite. So that's been my experience so far.
Absolutely, thank you so much. I think people are experiencing this time so differently. It's so important to hear about those differences and work out what we can take for that and thinking about a future beyond this immediate period that we're in. Imelda, I noticed your hand up as well. Then we're going to go, I can see James as well and Julia, and then we're going to have a look at the new spider diagrams. So Phil will start scanning any minute. Imelda.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose I was going to. I totally relate to what Jen was just saying. I can completely get that, but I personally, I mean, I think it's a really, really interesting strand on ritual that's coming through here, because I thought it was just me, because I'm not a religious person or anything like that. I'm not at all into rituals, actually. But what I find during lockdown is every morning I do some yoga in the living room that overlooks the garden. And then when I've done that, this sounds really hippie-ish, but I don't care if you want to laugh at me, feel free. I walk out barefoot and inspect my newly grown spinach, which I've never grown before in my life, and I get disproportionately excited with this progress of my spinach. And being barefoot and kind of joining the growth of the herbs and the vegetables that I've for the first time grown this year, I feel that starts my day in a really kind, sort of grounded way. And then I kind of walk in and have my breakfast and carry on with the day. And I think, to me, that wouldn't have been particularly something I would have thought of doing on a very regular basis before. Now I do. And it's something I think I will keep going forever. So yeah, I just wanted to reiterate that and think this is a really fascinating strand that's come through. Thank you.
James, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to say that it's interesting because that was really great of Jen to share that, because I think that my tendency is to be positive and talk about the things, but I think actually I've gone through ups and downs in this, through this period where I've just gone and embraced it in a sense, and other times gone, actually no, this isn't on at all. So I think I've just to sort of reflect back on Jen, that I've had moments where I've kind of got fed up with it all, and other times where I've just kind of really, because I've been forced to just take stock of things.
James. Julia, did you have your hand up?
I've just written in the box. I think it's important that I respond to Jennifer, because I had that experience, and I've always lived in a city. I grew up in Manchester, and before I sort of left my little studio flat, I was absolutely the outside had become somewhere that I was absolutely terrified of. I was literally sleepless with it, and I think this is quite an interesting one that we have to factor in terms of going forwards to the brief. Is that this brief we're talking about is as urban central development with a cross section of transport, people. I mean, there's something else I want to say about social distancing and all this, whereas where that is really a constant pressure, it's an exhausting thing for human beings that are social animals anyway, to be so constantly aware, and particularly if there are health risks and all the rest of it, to have to be aware of that every second. I mean, this be alert thing, if you're in a high rise or a flat or anywhere, which was I was in a very small flat in a very confined space, and then the outside was even more terrifying. I think it's a really important thing for us to try and see the two sides, because it makes that whole development of the space and what we do with the outside so central now. Like, to me, the top of the agenda.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, for all of those thoughts. I think those different tensions of how lockdown's been experienced is kind of quite important tool thing, sort of set of resources for us to think with, for thinking about YoCo in the future. So Phil, are you ready to share the diagrams that you've done?
I am. Hold on a second. Here we go. So yeah, this was the walkabout, and so I suppose the key thing from here was about this thing about the discovery of new parts of the place that you live. This hidden treasure of the Blue Plaques trail leaflet, and the fact that I think a lot of people are finding kind of bits of their own neighbourhood which have kind of levels of meaning. The place doesn't change, but you look at it differently by seeing it through those different eyes. This one about the kind of the use of this fairly simple ritual of going out, going to the shops, buying the things, having the things you want, the fresh air, the fresh food that you choose, and that notion of the comfort that provides, being a fairly straightforward thing, but important one. And this kind of blob at the top about, parallel to that, the kind of nature of van deliveries within the city and how that's going on, and how we can, as we move forward, maybe deal with that differently and think about designing places which make that process less intrusive. The next one then is this kind of set of blobs here, which is about, Julia's one about, this elasticity of time and the notion that all the kind of sensitivity is dialed up and we notice more. But also this kind of thing about ritual or habit or whatever we call it, this notion of kind of things that we constructed in our lives which might repeat, which have greater meaning. And again, with Sue there, the kind of notion that that natural cycle and the ability to build kind of ritual from it can be something which enables you to settle into somewhere that's unfamiliar. Again, Rebecca with the sheep, and about how they kind of ground you in a place which is new. And then lastly, the kind of the alternative view of the outside and about how it can be threatening. And I mean, I guess this is something which is as Helen said, kind of we're really going to have to think about in terms of how we use outside space and the kind of new significance it takes on as a place, certainly in the short term, a place to meet people, a place which where it's our escape from our own four walls, but it needs to feel safe. It needs to feel comfortable. It needs to feel part of our life rather than something into which we venture with trepidation. So those are the four that we got for that second one.
That's brilliant. So what Phil's going to work on now is compositing those different diagrams into one that we can use for the final part of today's session, which will be to start to draw out what all of this discussion we've been having and all of this sense of connections and networks might mean for thinking about the spaces, the social relationships and the economics of YoCo. But to really start to help us think about that interconnectedness, James is now going to share a few examples that are really inspiring and that might help us think through some of that dynamics between spaces, social relationships and economics. So I'm going to hand over to James to do that.
I'm going to hand over to James too, so hold on a second. Go.
Brilliant. Thank you. Can everyone hear me all right? Yeah, thumbs up. Excellent. Can you see this okay? Great. Okay, good stuff. So yeah, so I'm going to just introduce a few case studies and just to talk about this idea of community wealth building. This has definitely come up in what Phil's and Helen have talked about earlier on in terms of the ideas that came out of my YoCo Central work. And it's basically focusing on the sort of an antidote to the inequality that we're sort of experiencing when you think about the huge divide between the rich and poor, and basically just acknowledging the current economic models aren't working. So, current policy, and it does worry me a little bit about YoCo Central, is that development policy is that they'll bring in investment and attract it in, but all of it gets extracted away to like shareholders and in terms of dividends to investors. So it's about taking control of that wealth and keeping it within a community. So this idea of having your cake and eat it, I've always found that saying absolutely bonkers, because what's the point of having cake if you can't eat it? But the sort of message behind it is that I just think this idea that actually I think we can have our cake and eat it. And I think that a lot of the narrative, because we talk too much about money and capital in the sense of financial capital, I think that's the problem. So it's about helping communities increase asset ownership. It's about anchoring jobs locally to an area, broadening ownership over capital within an area, helping achieve environmental goals. The climate crisis is a huge issue that we're all facing. So, and communities want to achieve that, but they're kind of hamstrung quite a lot by what they can do because financial capital isn't there for them to allow to do that. So, and expand public services and ensure economic stability. The one thing that COVID-19 has shone a light on, it's not caused the economic crisis, it's shone a light and revealed how unstable the economy is. So it's about that idea of, rather than just focusing on financial capital, it's about acknowledging there's other types of capital out there, I guess. So I'm just going to introduce this, not in too much detail, but this idea. I'm really enjoying this book at the minute, Regenerative Enterprise, or the ideas that have come out of this short book. That idea that there are other types of capital, and using money better to support all forms of these types of different currencies, because there's loads of different currencies that are out there. And capturing wealth and redistributing it, that's one of the key things, one of the 8 big ideas that came out. So setting up co-ops for goods and services so that money stays within an area. Giving workers a stake in businesses, that's something powerful thing that we could do. Local investment and support, financial support, community banks, community shares. There's loads of different ways in which you can make financial capital work better. And there's lots of examples out there of that, and I will going to go through a few shortly. But what I think is really exciting about YoCo and the concept of this design neighborhood is all the things we talked about today, all the businesses and these little routes that we go on. You can create an ecology and a local habitat of businesses, and they could all support each other financially. And that's a really, really nice idea. And I think that you can collectively work together to achieve wealth. So I'm going to go through a few examples. One's close to home to me, and others are a bit further away. But I'm going to start with this project in Slough. It's the Handmade Bakery. It's a cooperative. They are based in a part of West Yorkshire that's it's kind of, there's some quite exciting things going on there. They've got a community-owned greengrocers. They've got a local mill, and it basically came around this idea that they wanted to use traditional baking techniques and organic ingredients, and they wanted to expand their setup. So they're a workers' co-op, and they had an opportunity to buy a building, but they didn't want to riddle themselves with debt. So what they did was that they offered an investment opportunity that paid back their investors. It paid back their interest in bread bonds. So basically, people invested money into the project, and their dividends was a loaf of bread once a week, or a loaf of bread twice a week. And it's a really, really nice idea, because what they've done is they've taken that money, and they've not just done that to benefit the cooperative. They've created a cafe as well, which is a great social space for the community to be now. They've also developed a community garden, and they're doing lots of things around training and the idea about passing on knowledge of all these traditional skills and stuff. So they're doing lots more than just focusing on the capital. And I put a link in here, and I put a link to all these projects so you can see. But it's a really, really worthwhile looking at, and a really, really, really interesting project. So that's how looking through this prism of community wealth building with a bakery works. Moving on to think about housing. So Yorspace, a CLT based in York. Some of our directors are here today. Some people that I know the project. Basically, this was a group of people in York trying to build sustainable homes and coming up against issues around being able to do that. And affordability in housing is a massive issue. So by looking at a different way to finance a development, we've basically created what we've called the community bank of mum and dad. The idea that one of the biggest hurdles to home ownership is the deposit. And so if we could pool resources, we could lower the deposits to residents and make housing more accessible. So, it's a community land trust linked with the housing co-op. And so we're using that wider community wealth to find access, to make housing more affordable, sustainable housing more affordable in York. And I just wanted to show this slide too, because I thought this is quite a good way of communicating this, because all these 5 people, or these 5 pools of people, grant funders, local investors, potential residents, City York Council, local volunteers, they're all people that are either volunteering their time, or there's money that's been put in for positive reasons. None of those people are the banks that we're borrowing from. We are borrowing from an ethical bank. But yeah, it's that idea that we can capture all that wealth and lock it into a community land trust and hold that in perpetuity, and then create these co-ops that ensure that affordability is recycled from generation to generation. So that's a really interesting idea of bringing community wealth into housing. The last example I wanted to show is one that combines the two. This is a really, really cool project up in Liverpool called Home Baked. This is basically set in Anfield and Liverpool, and it all started with the saving the pie shop. Basically, there's a pie and bakery shop on the corner near Liverpool football stadium, and it was going to go bust, and they bid a buyout, and they basically taken it into community ownership. Now that is a cooperative that is funding a community land trust in the area. They are basically in 2015 or 2010, sorry, lots of money was taken out. I think 128 million was basically just pulled from underneath their feet in terms of housing development. So the local community came together around this idea that they wanted to pull money into the area through the vehicle of this pie shop, basically. And they've taken over land from the council, and they're now bringing forward proposals to basically completely redevelop the high street and the housing to create affordable housing. So they're linking enterprise, community interest enterprise with housing, and it's kind of a loop. This idea that the bakery shop is funding the housing, and then the income from the housing is then going to fund back into the bakery and into other ventures too. So it's a really, I think, a really interesting project that starts to show the next step in terms of the evolution of these ideas around neighbourhoods becoming a bit more self-sufficient and dependent on each other and supportive. So that's a few sort of ideas of how investment can fund different things. Didn't have a huge amount of time, so I don't want to talk too much, but there is another really good example. But I'll send I think we're going to share these slides out later. A really good project down in London, Coin Street Community Builders. They've done a really amazing thing down in London where they're doing housing, they're doing a huge community centre, they're doing public space, businesses, and it's a project that's inspiring YoCo. So I would definitely recommend looking into that too. All about that idea of just looking at different forms of capital and how you can make it work for you. So hopefully that does a good job of setting the scene for what these, if we're imagining this neighbourhood, what all these businesses, how they could connect and how they could support each other. And yeah, back to you, I think, Helen.
That's brilliant, James. Absolutely inspiring examples. And so it might be questions or things that occur to you out of those examples that you want to bring into the discussion. But what we'll do is we'll filter that through the specific discussion about building a brief for YoCo and for York Central. So what's going to happen now, I think, if Phil's ready, and he has had a bit of a tricky task. All the time James has been speaking, Phil's been trying to work out whether he could composite the different maps that we developed from the activities and discussions, just so that we have a kind of visual reference point for starting to think about these 3 dimensions that have been introduced and that the examples James just given are really working with, which is thinking about creating spaces, fostering networks and reshaping economics to make it all possible. So in a moment or two, we'll have a look at that composite diagram and then start to open up that discussion with all of us here, thinking about what the implications of the map that we're going to look at has for thinking about spaces, thinking about social networks, and thinking about the underlying economics that can make that work and redistribute wealth in a way that makes the kind of neighbourhoods we want to live in possible.
Right, Jane, I need to get you to close down your stuff on there. Great.
There you go.
Brilliant, and I now to make myself present, which I am, and I can then share this, which, okay, so that was supposed to be 10 minutes, James, and it felt like much less, but there we go. So this was my given this a kind of multi-dimensional thing, apologies for where this doesn't work or only works very clunkily here. So what I've done is kind of look at I've done kind of 2 main strands of how we leave the 4 walls of our own home and how we go to places that we choose to go and do things that we choose to, and how we then also go to places we need to go, and how we then connect that. Because one of the things that seems to very much come out of it is about how when we go out, we tend to not just go somewhere and come back. We like kind of making the journeys circular. We like making up routes which give us a chance to do different things along the way. So that's important. It seems to be a common theme that we are all conscious about what happens along the way, so that we make journeys where we think, where we can, about being somewhere that's green or interesting or peaceful, or where there are people, or where we can jog along in neutral listening to a podcast. and do stuff like that. This notion of connecting stuff that where Julia used this wonderful word, food lines, which seems to be a kind of one of those kind of fundamental threads which binds stuff together, and how we do that. At the kind of need to go end of things, I've kind of identified this fact that while we might go to places where you need to go, like shops or whatever else, building the social, so building additional layers of stuff into that, which is about the people that run the businesses, the people that we meet there, all that kind of stuff is important. And so the connections with places, if we're going to a place where the food's good, but we know the people who produce it are also nice, then that's very much a good thing. And picking up on this notion about the world outside being potentially an alienating place, this seems to be a kind of key issue about how you make the world outside feel safer and feel more connected, because you're making connections through the people rather than just through the spaces and places and the activities. This notion of multi-purpose places, so the importance of places which serve a function, which might be showing films or serving coffee or whatever, but also provide us with an opportunity to work there or to meet people there, to run businesses from there or whatever else, and that being important. At the kind of places we choose to go end of things, the notion of family and friends and the importance of them within the city. But then also this thing which has come out of particularly a couple of good examples there about the rituals and the routines that we create for ourselves. So the habits that we choose to have and the meaning that we attach to them, and having places which enable that to happen, whether that's about nature or whether it's about specific times of the year or whatever, that seems important. And over on the left, I've just put a couple of general kind of observations. The first is about, can we create complex places with different layers of meaning? And this came from a number of people talking about re-exploring their own neighbourhood or their own town, but seeing stuff they hadn't noticed before. And that often happens in places which have history to them, and so the layers get built up and just naturally over time. Can we create that kind of complexity, those layers of meaning, within a new place where it's all built at more or less the same time? And also this second point I put over on the left is about, can we surround the necessary with good stuff, which is basically saying, if we need shops, we need offices, we need workplaces, we need even things, places to park occasional cars and stuff like that. Can we surround them, can we set them all in a context which is good stuff? So whatever definition of good we want, whether that's about nature or about places which enable connections to be made, so places to meet and sit and talk or whatever else. So just really thinking about how we set the things we have to put in there in a context which is about making more of it. And I just kind of tossed in this kind of point about deliveries, that we do need to think about how stuff shuffles around, but how it does it in ways that doesn't screw up the whole of the rest of the environment that we want. Does that kind of make sense?
That's brilliant. So what that is trying to composite all of the things that we've been speaking about in the previous sessions, but with the real aim of drawing out by the end of this session a bit of a kind of vision, a bit of a kind of brief for what we need YoCo to do to really make the most positive place and neighbourhood. As we talk, we're going to talk around the issues that we've been speaking about, talk around the composite map that Phil's developed. Sue and Imelda are going to be taking notes on a Google Doc that they'll share at the end of this discussion. So there'll be a bit of a record that then YoCo can start to continue to work with in setting the brief for the neighbourhood on York Central. So open discussion really. We're going to think about these three different dimensions: the spaces, the social networks, and the economics. So we're going to let's start by thinking about the kind of spaces that we need in order to create the kinds of things that we want that have come out of the discussion so far. So what the spaces need to do to enable the kinds of interactions and qualities of life that we've been speaking about?
They need to be well connected, I guess.
Thinking about, you know, public transport, or in other ways when you're thinking about connection.
I'm thinking cycle paths and footways, that, you know, footpaths. I think, yeah, something that allows that interaction. I mean, from what came through for me from speaking to people and when I did my own was that actually I wander from this bit and I wander to that bit, and so kind of things. And they also don't have to be close together. That's what's interesting, is that that's helpful, but actually people choose to go a route because it's a nice route and they can walk the dog or they can do so. You know what I mean? I think that kind of plays into it. So as long as there's a connection, that doesn't mean you're, also not engaging a road. I think in that idea, I think there's a really good image that Rebecca shared recently, this idea of that big gulf gap between where pavement to the other pavement is. It's just out of bounds for pedestrians. So yeah, I think strong connections between businesses that aren't interrupted or interfered with by cars.
I'd kind of second that, and I think the greenery and the back to nature and the things growing, which Imelda and Julia both mentioned, that's so basic, and sometimes we don't stop and think about it, but I think we all do see it and all think that's important. And I think that link to the earth and the ground and just greenery, it is so important. Even that picture of the housing set up in London had a great big nice green square in the middle of it there, and I think that is so important.
Can I really, this is something that is a really big question for me. I'd like everybody's thoughts for me, because I don't know whether it's me being obsessed with it, is that because there's another project I'm doing which is all about this idea that we're going to be socially distancing, whatever, physically distancing. So the outside space has become really, really privileged. And I put in the notes, I'm trying to deal with this, how we work with the brief and what's coming out of it when the outside is at somehow privileged, but at the same time, I was interested in that demonized feeling of being inside to be protected in case we get more viruses. And I think that I think that that's something I don't know how we document that sort of duality, and really it's an experience that we've only had for a few months. I mean, we haven't been walking around 2 meters away from everybody else for long, so we're not quite sure how it's messing, or how it's messing is the wrong word, how it's we're experiencing something completely new, and we don't know how we're going to want to articulate that in terms of how we build and experience space. Because for me, it's still sometimes I just think, oh, this is weird. I'm socially distancing from my daughter. It's like, I'm spending my whole time. So I just wonder whether that's big for how at what point we start, what I'm saying is that for me, it's a very big thing, this idea, but I don't know whether it is for everybody else.
And do you mean the big thing, the green spaces and the kind of...
Yeah, just the whole thing of when I'm looking at any built or unbuilt environment, all I think about is the future and how, although we're supposed to be getting this vaccine and everything else, that actually the whole way in which we live now is being reconfigured. Yeah. It is just the whole sense of spatial reasoning, the whole chicken caboodle, if you like, that because it's going to take a while and we don't know how long, that by the time we've got this vaccine, it's not actually different now. It's the different now thing. It isn't the new normal, because, it's not normal to walk around. In my world, it wasn't normal to walk around 2 meters from everybody. So what does this mean for planning and spatial reasoning and what we're doing in a community-owned community land trust?
there's an interesting point that's occurred to me over the last few weeks have been about this notion that up until what's recently happened, it was considered perfectly acceptable to design people's homes with no way of getting outdoors apart from, often out through shed space and into the street or whatever. So the idea of balconies or roof terraces or even kind of soft space between you and the public realm, between where the cars are, to spend time and to be. And that seems to be something that there has to be a kind of real kind of shift now to think about how we make sure that everywhere there are opportunities for people to get out from the four walls and do so in a way where they can choose how close they want to be to other people. And the kind of 2 meter social distancing stuff kind of is kind of hardens that up. But I think for all of us, there's always a kind of I often see, I'm an architect, so I often see kind of housing schemes designed with green space where the architects or whoever has decided people are going to go and sit, and you look at it and think, is anybody really going to? Kind of completely impersonal. There's no kind of definition of space and all that kind of stuff. And we need to really think much more about the public space that we now create to make it more usable and to think more about how people use public space and how they can get closer to people when they want, but also be away from them when they want to.
Can I just sort of come in there just as a response, Phil? Because what I'm trying to get at is that people's it's rewiring people's physiology. It's so different. That's how I'm beginning to track now in conversations and responses. I say this because I've had to watch my grandchildren deal with not being able to be near me, and I've studied their responses, and these are very young people. And it is you can almost see, and so it's a question for me of how we learn to dump the past, and that's what's worrying me about this new normal phrase, and actually saying, well, we take what we had and then we'll reconfigure it a bit, this, that, and the other. And I think Rebecca's just written about this people making their own paths. I think that's a really interesting one to do that. How we were doing the journeys earlier on and tracking the deep responses of how people are really physically responding. I think that's that as a group, what I'd be really interested in seeing is how we widen that up, to communities and find out actually what they're doing with what they have now that is rewiring them and actually learning from that. I've got several, not for this conversation, but we can talk further. I'm on with people in Stoke-on-Trent talking about this because it feels like we do need to do a lot of learning somehow or other.
Rebecca?
Just as a bit of a response to the it's open till the 30th of June, isn't it now, the York Central planning consultation that they've put up. Is there some sort of digital mapping that we could maybe do? Don't know, we'd have to talk to someone who knows about these things, but that could virtually open up York Central so that we could see, and then people might be able to sort of map out if it was open space, if it was public land right now, without anything in it, how might people use it? How might they do some sort of virtual desire lines or something that could show how people would use the space? I don't know how you would do that, but it might be worth looking into. Just because this transport thing, they're already decided how people are going to be connected to that space. They're already go on, Phil.
I think I suppose the interesting thing with that is about scale or grain or whatever you want to call it, because the proposals as they stand are very much about building a road through the site, which is seen as being there for getting traffic through the site. The kind of conversation we've had this afternoon seems to lean much more towards a kind of pattern of getting around, which is about how we do complex journeys which enable us to stop at places where we feel like it, which enable us to meet people and stop, which enable us to do kind of rich things like that. And those kind of journeys, while it might be hard to plot that on the site, given the site, if the site was all just kind of open space, I think it does kind of point at the kind of how intricate is that grid, because the grid that we've been given is pretty much kind of one road through the middle and about 6 roads off it. Whereas the kind of thing it sounds like we're talking about seems to be something which is about much tighter kind of grid of routes through the site and a looser kind of arrangement so that people can choose their own.
Organic.
Yeah, it can be more organic, that people can find their own way through.
So maybe this is really important to log, and obviously it is true that there is definitely a planning application window for commenting at the moment. So when we write out with links coming out of today's session, we can come through the information for that as well. But what would be really useful, I think, picking up on the examples that James shared with us, thinking a bit about the kind of economic element to this, because one of the clear aims that YoCo is working with is how to reshape economics in a way that redistributes wealth and creates a kind of network and ecosystem of businesses and investment that enables the kind of activities and social networks that we want to be able to do. So I was wondering if people had any particular reflections on the kind of implicit economics within the stories that we were telling, the bits that really worked, and that we could draw out for thinking about the brief for YoCo. Sorry, who? Julia?
Yes, I'm just thinking about the food element. Sorry, the thing about food. It's just becoming so big now, all about food chains, and I'm wondering whether there's something in this that we look at the independent sector. Didn't Pete Gilbane put it up on the Facebook? The Royal Bishy Road shops won that award nationally for doing all the cooking. Just turning themselves around and cooking meals, and in a way, the spend overall in the country, while we've been in the different now space, has been much higher in food. So everything that is happening with our food chains, is this something that is really an economic driver going forwards that could be somehow part of that? I'm just looking at that phrase you've used, Helen, of redistributing the wealth. Because I've never really thought specifically about this development and the whole community cohesion part of it, in terms of, yes, we want to do that for people's lives, and how are people going to eat? And I wonder whether that, how are people going to eat, and this whole debate that we're now having a lot, and will be bigger post the Brexit thing, of food chains, food poverty, two societies, and that this is a way of actually, this could be a real driver, because in York we've got a lot of projects and programs, and Yessie as well, with Bob, what's his name, that I'm working with, that could really firmly enmesh this into the recycling of the economy. So it's just to say that we haven't done any specific work on it, but I think that's a really strong driver, because everybody's got to eat.
That links to something that I think Rebecca posted in the box about necessary, oh no, Sue said necessary stuff. So kind of thinking about what's necessary for life.
Yeah, I think I said something about food, shelter and community, but then I was reading, I can't remember where, I'm going to try and find it, an article about how London basically became a city because of food importation, and it was about like following how those, like all of the different areas of London had their different I'm sure Helen would be able to explain this much better than me, but it was a specific person who looks at food in history, and she was talking about like it was based on the cattle markets coming in and things being brought up the river, like from like herbs and spices from other countries, or like where they brought the grain in from that part of the UK. And it was all about food distribution. The entire city is based on that as a, that's just what it is, why it exists, how it is. And we've gone away from that, and can we get back to that? And it's that 15-minute neighbourhood thing again, isn't it?
James.
Can I say, yeah, it seems weird to reflect on my own case study that I presented, but just that the thing that hopefully did come through in what I was saying, that in each of the examples, they identified a need that they needed solving in their community. So for the handmade bakery, is that they wanted to stop baking bread in their tiny two-down galley kitchen, and they needed some facilities, but they didn't want to riddle themselves with debt, so they looked to the community. And then the community said, well, we need a community space, it's a cafe. And so it's that idea of making the connections between people, like, Yorspace too, like the model that we've adopted in terms of ownership was based on the premise that we're helping ourselves, we're actually helping others. So how can we do that? And then other people could see the benefit of that and invest it, because they're thinking, what can happen with my kids? Where are they going to be able to afford to live? And with Home Bake, that was completely at the heart of it. They had all that money pulled out of them, and they saved the bakery, and that has been the hub. And I didn't mention it, but that whole regeneration has been completely designed by the people that lived in that area. And so I think if you can identify needs, and it's interesting, this idea of food, but if you can identify, right, we definitely need to produce food on this site because people live there, well, that's a need right there. So first thing, let's put a bakery in the middle. But how are you going to fund that? You look at places where you can grow food to bring into that. That's what they did at Slough with the handmade bakery. They had a green space that they redeveloped and brought food into the cafe. So I think in order for the ecology of these businesses to work together, I think it's doing a bit of an input-output analysis of businesses to see how they can support each other.
Brilliant.
And the pie shop as well, James. Let's keep the pie shop in there.
Oh, yeah, bakery and a pie shop. Yeah. And then also, I did mention there's also a brewery on the horizon too. So.
What would be useful at this point? I know other people maybe want to speak, but it would be great, Imelda and Sue, if you can share your Google Doc link, so that we can just see what's there already and just see if there are particular things that people want to make sure they log before the end of the session. And while you're doing that, Jennifer, did you want to say something? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to be really clear about something that I'd really love to see is a commitment to an inclusive and diverse community that does more than just pay lip service to that idea. I'd be really interested from a commerce and services point of view to see things that cater to people at all life stages, for example, that this isn't just aimed at families with young kids or old folks or something. I'd be really interested for us to think a bit more carefully about what we mean when we say we want fewer roads and we want other types of access, because what does that mean for somebody with a mobility issue, for example? I also want I want us to think carefully about what we mean if we say we care about businesses being locally owned, when in a place like York, it's possible that an unintended consequence of that is that we're saying, well, we want locally owned, it ends up being white owned. So that's something that I'd like us to think about, very genuinely think about, not just pop it in a policy and call it done.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. Yeah, thinking through the consequences of the politics of the local, I think, is an absolutely crucial part of this agenda. Imelda, I think one of the challenges is that we're probably not going to be able to read the document. I wonder if you stick I don't know whether the link's set to so that anyone can view it, but I wonder if you stick the link in the chat box, we could all open it up as a separate window.
Okay.
And then have a quick look at it. I think at this point, we're going to be finishing bang on 4 o'clock. So at this point, what we'll be doing when we look at this link is just a final log of any issues we feel that we haven't covered. And then what Imelda's going to be doing just to finish off the session is pointing to what's coming next for YoCo. And we know we won't resolve everything today and we won't be able to get through all of the crucial issues we've raised today. But what we can do is log them and make sure that we're addressing them and dealing with them in future workshops. So So when we get the link, we'll have a quick look and just log any final issues that we need to. I think Kat's off, so thanks for coming, Kat. See ya.
Sorry, I've just lost the chat box. Oh, here we go.
Top right hand corner.
Okay. That should be it.
Brilliant, that's fantastic. So let's just have a quick look and just do a final log any issues that we feel we have raised today, but that we want to make sure gets noted for future work and for future thinking with different people as well, with wider groups of people. Okay, everyone, can everyone have a look at that? Right, I can see there's 6 of us on there. So I think the question at this point is just to quickly note if there are things that we have mentioned that, or perhaps haven't actually, but we know we want to pick up in the future. It's a great list. Wow, you did a fantastic job while we were talking. This is really fantastic account of our conversation. So with that and the network maps that Phil's done and the chat box, we've got a really great set of resources we can work with to write up today's session. Any final things anyone wants to mention at this point? Well, thank you so much for. Oh, Julia, do you want to?
Just to say, I'll outline it to Helen and Phil, but I'm working on several things, and I'm not sure whether they're relevant to this collective discussion. So it's just to say that I've got a huge amount from it myself.
Brilliant, thanks so much, Julia. Great, well, I think what I'll do is hand back over to Imelda to draw the session to a close and to point to what's coming next for YoCo, with the hope that all of you will keep getting involved with the discussions as we work through some of the more complex and knotty issues that we've surfaced today. So back over to you, Imelda.
Thanks, Helen. And thanks, Helen and Phil and James, for doing such amazing work there, bringing it all together. Thanks also, obviously, to everyone who's come along. Really, really good to have you here. And there's been some massively helpful input. So, yeah, where we go next, again, just I've put it in the chat, but just to remind you that our website is YoCo, YoCo.uk. So if you want to go to that, what we do there is you can join up and join our mailing list. And we will be posting this as a blog on the website, and we also post our regular events that are up on the website as well. So that is the website. What we'll also do is send everybody who signed up for this event the recording. I think Phil and Helen, that's going to be technically possible. So we'll send you the link to the recording and the chat box and all the feedback from this. So you've actually got it there. And we would really, really love you to carry on to getting involved in this and chipping in your ideas and spreading the word, because what we really want to do is get as many people as possible into this. This is the opposite of other events you see. There was one that some of us went to the other day, which is how York is going to be post-COVID, and I'll choose my words carefully, but I think that was more top-down. This is very much bottom-up, so depends which direction you prefer to come from. But if you like the bottom-up approach, then you're in the right place. We absolutely, really, really actively welcome your views. So this has been really exciting, really inspiring, and really helpful. Can't thank you enough, and please just stay involved and enjoy the rest of the festival. There's lots of other stuff going on. It's got another week or so to run, so hopefully we'll see you at some other events as well. But yeah, thanks very much indeed, and stay safe, stay well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Imelda.
Thanks for coming. Bye.
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 Thanks, everyone.
Everybody.